All of a sudden, the railroads start going out of business. The problem was a lot of those railroads, which makes it worse, were built. The railroads and the trains, that money that built them was all borrowed. The guy borrows the money, builds the railroad. Say, don't worry, I'll just pay all this back when people start using my railroad. Well, you can't pay it back when your railroad goes out of business. Another problem was the people that borrowed money to invest in the railroad, they borrowed money. It's not like, oh, I've got $5. I want to buy part of your railroad. I have no bucks. You know what? I'm just going to go borrow some money from the bank and then I'm going to buy some of your railroad. Don't worry. Once your railroad starts making money, I'll take some money and I'll pay back my loan. Well, you can't do that if the railroad goes out of business. The railroad company can't pay back its loan. I can't pay back my loan I used to buy part of the railroad. Eventually, the bank doesn't get its money and the bank goes under. And when the bank goes under, the money goes. And then Steve across the street, who has no business in railroads, didn't buy railroads, doesn't ride railroads, has nothing to do with railroads. All of a sudden, his bank shut down and all his money's gone because I borrowed money to buy some of a railroad that went bust, and the railroad company borrowed a bunch of money to build a railroad that went out of business, and all that money was borrowed. It didn't get paid back. Now the bank has no money, and so when Steve goes to the bank, Steve's like, hey, can I get my money I put in here yesterday? I'm sorry, we're out of business because they built too many railroads, and the railroad economy collapsed. And with it, it sucked us down. And as we get sucked down into this whirlpool, guess what, Steve? You're coming with us. And so the entire economy crashes right along with it. This is called the Panic of 1893. It's created by an oversupply of railroads, drives the price down. They can't make money. They go down, and they bring down the people involved, mainly the banks. And then when the banks go, the entire country goes. This stuff used to happen about every 10, 15 years throughout American history. It doesn't happen so much anymore, but we did have something close to it in 2008 with our economic recession, the Great Recession. So that's Panic of 1893. Now here's where J.P. Morgan sneaks in and says, oh, you see, because the railroads are still there. The railroad lines are there. The trains are sitting there, but they can't do any business. They went bankrupt. In a lot of cases, the banks had to end up the banks foreclosed and take the railroads. And so it's just sitting there idle, and the banks just dying, right? The banks are dead. The banks can't pay people back because they don't have money, but they do have these railroads. J.P. Morgan walks in and says, I'll buy that railroad. And it ends up J.P. Morgan walks in and buys basically all of the railroads for next to nothing. And guess what? Ding, ding, ding. J.P. Morgan has got himself a railroad horizontal monopoly. Now, if you want to ride the railroads, there's no competition anymore. Remember, the competition drove the prices down and it drove them out of business? Well, there ain't any competition anymore. J.P. Morgan owns most of the railroads. And if you want to ride a railroad, which you have to do, and if you want to ship your goods, which you have to do, then you got to pay his price. So there is vertical integration, another example of cattle to the slaughterhouse, to the railroad cars, to the warehouses, to the meat packing plants where they slaughter it, to the delivery wagons, to the store where they sell the meat. If you want to vertically integrate the meat industry, you would have to have a farm, you have to have a slaughterhouse, you have to own railroad cars, you'd have to own warehouses, you'd have to own meat packing plants, you'd have to own the delivery wagons, right? The railroad cars are cool, but you also need ways to get it from the railroad cars to the stores, and then you have to own, so you got to own all that. A lot of work. Horizontal integration is where you control just all of one step. In the oil process, that was the refinery, is where Nelson Rockefeller got control of all of the oil refineries. And so if you got the oil out of the ground, you still had to go through him to get it processed. And if you wanted to sell the oil, you still had to go through him. He controlled everything. Example, if you want to do horizontal, if you owned all of the coal warehouses in America, then you would have a horizontal integrated monopoly. Now, there's an example of making these guys, J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, Rockefeller, look like evil, terrible people in this political cartoon. And there's another example of the robber barons making these guys look, Nelson Rockefeller came up with a great idea. Why should we make him a villain? Well, because these guys were struggling. Come up with an idea. Figure it out. I know that now, so some social studies teachers go, these evil robber barons, they're stealing from people. They are terrible. Are they really? Rockefeller came up with ingenious ideas. Carnegie was smart enough to figure out how to vertically integrate. J.P. Morgan was ruthless and knew exactly when to buy. So are we going to start demonizing people who are smart? I guess so, if that's what you want to do. This is nothing new. We do this today, and we do it back then. The people that have are made to seem like evil people. That's just one side of history. Again, you want to try to have a nuanced approach to understand both sides. No one is completely evil, and no one is completely good. You just need to understand the facts and how things happen and why they happen. Last, we're talking about social Darwinism. This is just straight racism. This is not real. During this time, the progressives came up with this concept. The progressives on the left side of your political spectrum, whatever you want to say, the progressives came up with this idea that genetically, some groups of people are superior and some people are inferior. And that is just blatantly racist and false. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Asian, American, Hispanic, we are genetically the same. Darwin had ideas that had to do with the animal kingdom, that had to do with evolution over millions of years. You cannot simply take his ideas and then slap them on to society to say that, well, one group of people are better. That is false. That is not true. It is not scientifically true. The progressives have bad ideas. This is a progressive idea, an idea that also led to eugenics, which is a horrible part of our history, and it also led to the Holocaust. Social Darwinism is not real. It is phony science pushed by progressives to push their own beliefs and their own ideological views on the world. Last thing we'll talk about, trickle-down capitalism. So trickle-down capitalism is the idea that if we create a low tax, if we don't tax the rich then will have more money. They will spend their money, and when they spend it at the factory or wherever they spend it, that'll create jobs. Whatever they buy, so let's imagine yachts. So let's imagine they buy a new yacht. Well, if they're buying yachts, that means we got to make more yachts, and that means we're going to need to hire more workers. And eventually, the guy at the bottom of the chain is going to make money. And it all starts if you just don't tax the rich spend money. That money then trickles into the businesses. And those businesses pay their workers. And then the workers have money, and it helps people out. And it all starts at the top. That is trickle-down capitalism. And trickle-down capitalism is, you're probably saying, that's nonsense. That's not the way it works. That's not real. You can't just not tax the rich and then magically it's all going to work its way down. Yes, you're right. It's foolish. It doesn't really work that way. It's never worked that way, and it's not real. And I'm absolutely shocked that it's in the AP guidelines and it's mistakenly put next to the social gospel. The social gospel and the gospel of wealth and trickle-down capitalism are not the same. Although gospel wealth doesn't even mean trickle down. The gospel wealth just says Andrew Carnegie is going to give money to help out schools and hospitals and better. They're not the same. Trickle-down capitalism is fake. It is not real. And you can see it in Trickledown Theory. This is a short book. It's 15 pages, written by Thomas Sowell, Trickledown Theory and Tax Cuts for the Rich. And here is what it is. This is not an economic theory. It cannot be found in the economic literature. You can read any economist, any of the thousands of pages of studies by economists, studying and coming up with theories, whether it's Keynesian economics, whether it's the Chicago School with Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, or if you want to study the Austrian economists, it does not matter. You're not going to see any legitimate economist, worthwhile economist, talk about trickle-down theory because it's not a real economic theory. It was made up by political activists that want to disparage the wealthy so they can raise taxes on the wealthy. This is not designed by conservatives. This was not designed by economists. This was a thing made up mainly by the Democratic Party to shame the rich and to find a way to say, no, we need to raise taxes. And this thing has been falsely attributed to the Republicans. It's just made up. It is not a real thing. It was completely created by political parties. And that's why I cannot believe it is in the AP guidelines. Trickle-down capitalism is not a thing. It never was a thing. It's not an economic theory. It was a political stunt or a political ideology created mainly by the Democratic Party over the last 40 to 50 years to make us attack and hate the wealthy. When I went over Andrew Carnegie getting rich, when I went over Nelson Rockefeller getting rich, when I went over JP Morgan getting rich, there was something inside you that said, oh, those rich people, they have it all. That goes back to this trickle-down capitalism idea of saying that wealth is bad and they need to pay more in taxes. Why? Why should they pay any more than you do? Shouldn't we all be treated equal under the law? What does the economics say? And really, if you look at the economics say if you raise the taxes on them, it doesn't work. They use this as an idea or a way to justify taxing the rich. They create this phony plan, and I showed you like this phony thing. Like, this is so stupid. What real economist would believe in this nonsense? Who would dream this up? They want it. You knew when I showed that to you, like, that's not going to really work that way. That's bogus. That's not going to happen. The reason why is because it was made up by a political party. It was not studied or discovered by an economist. It's made up. It was made up to justify taxing the rich. You make up this fake story, people believe the fake story, and then they realize, oh yeah, we need to tax the rich. If we don't tax them, they got this stupid plan about trickle-down economics. It doesn't really work. It's all a scam. No, there was no scam. There's nothing dreamed up. The reality is, if you raise taxes on the rich, they find ways around them. It doesn't work. If you raise taxes, it doesn't create any more revenue. And you can look through, and in this book, Thomas Sowell explains exactly what happens when you raise it. You actually make more money when you lower it. When you lower their taxes, it actually encourages them to spend more, and you actually will create more revenue for the government. When you raise it, it doesn't work. But good luck trying to explain that to someone who's already got their head buried in the sand and want to hate the rich. Look, I'm just a poor social studies teacher. I have no skin in the game. Why would I defend the rich? Why would I defend Andrew Carnegie and the wealthy robber barons? I'm not defending anyone. I'm just simply telling you the facts. There isn't really an argument here. The data says if you raise the taxes on them, it doesn't work. If you have lower taxes, it does work. It doesn't matter what you want and dream and wish. Those things don't matter. Your wishes and your wants are meaningless. The only thing that matters in economics and in social studies are the data, are the facts. Trust the facts. You got to turn down the noise from your heart a little bit. Define vertical integration and horizontal integration. Vertical integration is where you control every step in the process. We talked about Carnegie controlling everything in the iron ore in the steel industry. Horizontal was when Rockefeller controlled all of the oil refining. And then the result of a monopoly, I didn't really go into this, but here's the facts. If you have a monopoly, you can jack up the prices. If you control all of one good and people have to come to you for that one good or that one service, then you can charge whatever you want. If you do not have competition, no one is going to force you to compete. No one's going to force you to offer lower prices. When you have a monopoly, you can charge whatever you want. They're illegal in this country now, but if you ever wanted to consider doing it in a monopoly. Let's see if I can just stop this video real quick.